Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're really going back to basics with a psychology textbook.
Oh, fun.
And we're going to unpack some of the core ideas behind how research is done.
Yeah, getting into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. So, whether you're a student or just interested in psychology, you always hear about all these research studies.
Mhm.
But have you ever wondered, how do they actually design these studies?
Right.
And, how do they measure these things?
Yeah, especially
You
the
can't really see or touch, thoughts or feelings.
yeah, it can get really tricky.
Yeah.
And you know what? It all starts with these two key ideas, variables and constructs.
Okay, so variables and constructs.
Yeah, they might sound a little jargony at first,
A little bit.
but honestly, they're pretty straightforward once you kind of wrap your head around them.
Okay, well, let's start with variables then.
Okay.
What exactly do we mean by a variable when we're talking about research?
So a variable is basically anything that can change or have different values.
Okay.
Think about something like your commute to work.
Okay.
The time it takes you to get there, some days it might be 20 minutes.
Yeah,
Other days, 40 minutes if the traffic is bad.
totally.
That's a variable. The time it takes can vary.
So really, we're surrounded by variables constantly.
Yeah,
We just don't usually think about it that way.
exactly. And researchers use these variables to study the relationships between different things. Like they
Oh,
might want to know, uh, does the amount of sleep you get affect your mood the next day?
right.
So in that case, amount of sleep and mood
Yeah,
would be your variables.
makes sense.
Yeah.
I actually remember the textbook used rolling dice as an example.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So the outcome of a dice roll is a variable
Okay.
because it can be any number from 1 to 6.
Right, right.
And each of those is a different value.
Okay, so that's a very, tangible example
Yeah, super simple.
of what a variable is.
Yeah.
Cool. So we've got the basic definition.
Mm-hmm.
Now the book mentions all these different types of variables,
Yes.
which honestly can be a little overwhelming.
It can be a lot.
But I'm curious to learn more.
Okay, yeah, so one way to think about these different types is through the stimulus organism response model.
Ooh, a model.
It's called the SOR model for short.
Okay, SOR.
Yeah, and it's basically a framework that psychologists use to try to understand behavior.
Okay, so break down this SOR model for me.
All right, so picture this. You walk into a bakery.
Mm.
The smell of fresh bread hits you.
Oh,
That's the stimulus.
yeah. Okay.
It's anything in the environment that triggers some kind of response.
Okay, so that makes sense.
So you smell that bread, your stomach starts to growl.
Oh, yeah.
You suddenly crave a croissant. That's the organism reacting
Okay.
to that stimulus. And then you decide, okay, I'm going to buy a pastry.
Can't resist.
That's it. That's the response. The behavior that comes from that whole process.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah, basically. Something happens out in the world. We react internally, and then we act based on that reaction.
I like it, the SOR model.
Yeah, and it's happening all the time.
It-
The textbook used an example with a rat, but
Yeah.
the same idea applies to us humans.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This makes me think about how many stimuli we're bombarded with every day, constant, like ads and notifications,
Oh, my
news
goodness.
headlines. It's a lot. No wonder we feel overwhelmed sometimes.
It's a constant stream of information.
Yeah.
But I think understanding this SOR model
Mm-hmm.
can actually help us be more aware of how these things are
Mm.
affecting us.
Yeah.
How these external stimuli are influencing our internal states
Right.
and then ultimately our behavior.
Yeah. And then hopefully make more conscious choices.
Exactly.
Okay. I like that. So we've got the SOR model.
Yeah.
Now, the book also talks about another key distinction,
Okay.
independent and dependent variables.
Yes. So think of it like a science experiment.
Okay.
The independent variable is what the researcher is changing on purpose.
Okay.
It's like the cause and effect relationship.
Got it.
And then the dependent variable is the outcome that's measured to see if it was influenced by that independent variable.
The effect.
The effect, exactly.
Yeah. So let's say I was curious about whether listening to music while studying actually helps me focus.
Okay.
Would the type of music be the independent variable?
Yes.
And then my level of focus would be the dependent variable.
You got it. So you could have different groups of students listening to different types of music,
Right.
like classical rock or pop.
Yeah.
And then you could measure their performance on some focus-related task
Ooh, I like it.
and see if the type of music
Okay.
has any impact on their focus.
So the researcher controls the independent variable
Yes.
and then sees how that affects the dependent variable.
Exactly.
I'm starting to get it now.
Good. The textbook also uses an example
Yeah.
about the effects of noise on someone doing a task.
Yeah, I remember that one.
So in that case, the level of noise would be the independent variable.
Okay.
And the person's accuracy on the task would be the dependent variable.
It's like when I'm trying to work from home and my neighbor decides to do yard work.
Oh, yeah.
That noise definitely affects my productivity.
I feel that.
But unfortunately, I can't really control my neighbor.
Well, in a research setting, you would have a lot more control over those variables.
Yeah, true. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is making me realize that research design is way more intricate than I initially thought.
It is.
It's like this puzzle of figuring out which variables to change, which ones to measure,
Absolutely.
to try to uncover these relationships between things.
It takes careful planning and execution,
Yeah.
but once you grasp those concepts of independent and dependent variables,
Yeah.
you can really start to understand research studies.
Okay, that's helpful. So we've covered 2 ways to classify variables, the SOR model
Yes.
and then independent versus dependent variables.
Yep.
But the book mentions even more ways to categorize these things.
Well, there are a lot, yeah.
Like it can get kind of complicated.
It can.
But I want to learn more.
Okay, well, another important distinction is between quantitative and categorical variables.
Ooh, okay, quantitative versus categorical.
Yeah, so think about the information you see every day.
Okay.
Some things are measured with numbers.
Right.
Like the number of steps you take, the temperature outside,
Right.
the price of something.
Yeah.
Those are all quantitative variables. They deal with quantities or amounts.
Okay, numbers, I get it.
All right, and the categorical variables.
Yeah.
Those are about categories or groups.
Okay.
So think about things like your favorite color, your
Yeah.
gender,
Mhm.
your political affiliation.
Okay, so those put people into different groups
Exactly.
based on those characteristics.
Yes, and understanding this difference is super important because it affects how researchers analyze their data.
Right, because you can't really do math with someone's favorite color.
Exactly.
This is making me think about all the data that we're constantly surrounded by now
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere.
and how much of it relies on these variables.
It's like this hidden language almost
Yeah.
that researchers use to make sense of the world.
Totally. Okay, so we've got quantitative versus categorical. Now are there even more types of variables?
There are even more. We can also look at them in terms of whether they're active or attribute variables.
Ooh. Okay, active versus attribute.
Yeah, and then there's also continuous versus discrete.
Whoa, okay, hold on. My brain is already buzzing a little bit.
I know, it's a lot.
Let's take it one step at a time.
Okay, we can start with active versus attribute.
Okay, active versus attribute.
So imagine you're doing a study on exercise and stress.
Okay, I like it.
So the amount of exercise,
Okay,
that would be an active variable
okay.
because the researcher can directly manipulate it.
Right.
They can assign people to different exercise routines,
Okay,
but the participants' baseline stress levels,
okay.
that would be an attribute variable
Gotcha.
because it's already there. It's a pre-existing characteristic of that person.
So active is what the researcher changes, attribute is like what's already there, like a personality trait or something?
Yep, and that distinction is important because it helps researchers know what factors they can and cannot change in their study.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, so active versus attribute. Got it.
Okay, good.
What about continuous versus discrete?
All right, so think about it this way. Some things can take on any value within a certain range,
Okay,
like your height,
okay.
your weight, the time it takes you to run a mile.
Right.
Those are all continuous variables.
Okay.
They can be measured along a continuous scale.
Like a smooth line almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have discrete variables.
Okay.
Those can only take on specific separate values.
Sure.
So think about the number of siblings you have.
Yeah.
You can have 0, 1, 2, 3 siblings,
Right.
but you can't have 2.5 siblings.
Yeah. You can't.
It has to be a whole number.
Right. A distinct category.
Yeah, exactly.
So the number of pets I own would also be discrete.
Yes, because you can't have half a cat.
Exactly right.
And understanding this is also important because it affects how researchers analyze their data.
Okay.
Different statistical methods are used for continuous versus discrete variables.
Wow. It is incredible how much complexity there is in just this idea of a variable.
Right.
Like it seems so simple at first,
Yeah.
but they really do have their own little personalities.
They do. Each one tells a different story.
Yeah. Okay, I feel like I'm starting to get a handle on this world of variables.
Good.
Ready to move on to constructs.
Let's do it. Constructs is where it gets really interesting.
Ooh.
A little more abstract.
Okay.
But don't worry, we'll break it down for you.
All right, I'm ready.
So we've talked about all these different types of variables.
Yeah.
The things we can actually observe and measure.
Right. The concrete stuff.
But what about the stuff we can't see directly?
Ooh. Getting mysterious.
Right. Like the things that are kind of beneath the surface of behavior.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
That's where constructs come in.
Constructs.
Yeah. So think about something like intelligence.
Okay.
We can't actually see intelligence itself.
Right. It's not a physical thing?
No,
Yeah.
but we can kind of infer that it's there based on other things we could observe.
Okay, so like what kinds of things?
So like how well someone does on a test,
Okay.
how quickly they learn new information,
Hmm.
or even how creatively they solve problems.
So it's like we're seeing the effects of intelligence,
Yeah.
but not intelligence itself.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
constructs are like these underlying concepts
Okay.
that we use to explain and predict behavior.
I see.
They're not directly observable,
Mm-hmm.
but they help us make sense of the patterns that we see in the world.
Okay, so it's kind of like detective work, almost.
Yes,
You're looking for clues and piecing together evidence to understand this thing that you can't actually see.
exactly. And just like with variables, there are different types of constructs.
Oh, okay, so more categorization.
Always more categories in
Of
research.
course. Gotta love it.
The textbook focuses on two main types,
Okay, hit me with them.
intervening variables
Okay.
and hypothetical constructs.
Intervening and hypothetical. Okay, so let's start with intervening. What are those?
Okay, so imagine you're trying to understand why someone might eat a whole bag of chips,
Been there.
even though they're not actually hungry.
Oh, yeah, emotional eating.
Right. So there's something going on there beyond just like the physical need for food.
Right.
An intervening variable might be something like stress eating.
Okay.
It helps explain that link between the behavior, eating all the chips,
Yeah.
and the underlying emotional state, feeling stressed.
So it's like a bridge almost
Yes.
between this more complex idea and the actual behavior we can see.
Exactly. It's a shorthand for a more complex process.
I like it.
Yeah, the textbook uses the example of Clark Hull's concept of reaction potential.
Oh, yeah, reaction potential.
Oh, yeah, reaction potential. That rings a bell.
So Hall was trying to figure out what motivates behavior.
Okay, big question.
Right. And he said that reaction potential is a combo of two things.
Okay, what are they?
Habit strength,
Okay,
which comes from practicing something over and over again.
like riding a bike,
Exactly. And then drive. Okay.
which is that internal motivation or the urge to do something.
So someone might have a high reaction potential to eat a certain food if they've eaten it a lot in the past and
Yeah.
if they really like it.
Exactly. And that high reaction potential makes them more likely to actually eat that food.
Makes sense. It's like connecting those internal states to the behavior that we can see.
Exactly. Okay, so that's intervening variables.
Okay, got it.
Now on to hypothetical constructs.
Hypothetical constructs, lay it on me.
These are a little trickier.
Okay,
They're even more abstract.
okay,
And they often deal with things that are really hard to observe directly.
okay. Like what?
Like think about the concept of memory.
Okay.
We can't see memory itself,
Right, it's not a thing.
but we can tell that it exists based on what people can remember.
Right, like if they can remember a list of words.
Exactly. Or if they recognize a face that they've seen before.
So remembering is the behavior,
Mm-hmm.
but memory is this construct, this unseen force that lets us store and retrieve information.
I like that, the unseen force.
Right, it's powerful.
And it helps explain why some people have better memories than others.
Right, or why we forget things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or how different things like stress or lack of sleep can affect our memory.
This makes me think about the whole idea of consciousness.
Oh, yeah.
We can't observe consciousness directly,
Nope.
but we assume it's there because we experience it.
Right.
And we see other people behaving like they have consciousness.
Exactly.
Like the ultimate hypothetical construct.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that kind of highlights the challenge
Yeah.
and the excitement of psychological research.
Because we're trying to study these things.
Yes. These invisible forces that shape how we think and feel and act.
It's like we're exploring uncharted territory.
I love that.
Right. We need all these special tools to guide us.
And those tools are variables in our constructs.
Exactly. Okay, so we've got variables, the
Yeah.
things we can observe and measure,
Yes.
and then we've got constructs, those more abstract ideas that help us explain behavior.
You got it. Are there any other important things about these building blocks of research?
Oh, I'm sure there are.
There are a lot.
But is there one that's particularly key?
Yes. So one really crucial distinction is between constructs and operational definitions.
Ooh, okay. Constructs versus operational definitions. Break that down for me.
Okay, so the construct is that abstract concept,
Okay.
like intelligence or memory.
Mm-hmm.
And then the operational definition is how we actually measure that construct in a study.
So it's like the idea versus the tool we use to measure it.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you give me an example?
Okay, so let's say we're studying stress.
Okay. Big one these days.
Right. So stress itself is this abstract idea.
Yeah, we all feel it, but what is it really?
Right. So we need a concrete way to measure it in a research study.
I see.
So an operational definition of stress might be people's scores on a stress questionnaire.
Oh,
Or
okay.
maybe it's changes in their heart rate or their cortisol levels.
So you're making it measurable.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
And choosing the right operational definition is super important because
Yeah.
it determines how valid and reliable the research findings are.
Right, because if you're not measuring it
I
accurately,
think it's all going to be off.
yeah, your whole study is kind of meaningless.
Exactly.
So this is making me realize that research is really about making these careful choices,
It is.
about which variables to study,
Mhm.
which are constructs to focus on,
Yep.
and then how to measure those constructs.
That's a balancing act.
It really is. It's fascinating, though,
It is. And it's what makes research so challenging and also so interesting.
because you have to be creative
You do.
and think outside the box to really figure out how to study these things.
Yeah. And there's always room for innovation.
I'm really glad we did this deep dive.
Me too.
It's opened my eyes to all these intricacies of research.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just doing experiments.
It really is.
It's about critical thinking and being really thoughtful about how we study these complex concepts.
Absolutely.
Wow, this deep dive has really taken us on a journey.
It has, hasn't it?
Yeah, we went from these very, concrete, tangible variables
Mhm.
to these really abstract ideas, like memory and consciousness.
Right. It shows you how much ground psychology tries to cover.
It really does.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of wondering,
Yeah.
what does all this mean for me, in my everyday life?
That's a great question.
I'm not a researcher.
Right.
So how can knowing about these variables and constructs actually help me?
Well, I think one of the biggest benefits is that it helps you become a more critical thinker.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. We are just bombarded with research findings all the time.
Oh, yeah, constantly.
In the news, on social media, even just in conversations.
Right, it's everywhere.
And it's really easy to just take those findings at face value.
Yeah, especially if it sounds like it came from a good source.
Exactly. But now you can start asking those critical questions.
Like what kinds of questions?
Like, what were the variables in that study?
Okay.
How did they actually measure that concept?
Right, were there any limitations in how they did it?
Exactly. Having that framework of variables and constructs in mind,
Yeah.
it helps you really evaluate that information.
It's like having a superpower
It is.
to see behind the curtain and really understand what went into that research.
Exactly. You can start to peel back those layers and see it with a more discerning eye.
Yeah, and not just jump to conclusions.
Right, because one study doesn't necessarily prove anything.
Right. It's more complicated than that.
Exactly. And that kind of critical thinking is so important.
It is.
And it's not just for research findings, it applies to everything.
Oh, totally. I'm already thinking about ads.
Oh, yeah.
Political claims, even just stuff people say in my personal life.
Absolutely.
Now I have the tools to really examine those claims.
And see if they actually hold up.
Yeah, and make my own informed decisions.
Exactly. It's about being an active participant
Yes, I love that.
in the information you consume.
Well, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me.
I'm glad to hear that.
I feel like I have this whole new perspective.
It's been great exploring these concepts with you.
Yeah, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
we always like to leave our listeners with something to think about.
A little food for thought.
Exactly. So here's your final thought for today.
The next time you see a research finding that seems really interesting,
Mm-hmm.
don't just accept it at face value.
Yeah.
Think about what we've talked about today.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what were the key variables in that study?
Okay.
How do they define and measure those concepts?
Right, getting into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. And were there any limitations to their approach?
Because questioning those things can really help us understand the research better.
Absolutely. It takes it to a whole other level.
And remember, questioning doesn't mean being cynical.
No, not at all.
It's just about being engaged and thoughtful.
Exactly. And who knows, you might even get inspired.
Ooh.
Do some research of your own.
I love it. Well, that's all the time we have for today.
It flew by.
I know. But thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the building blocks of psychological research.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next video.